Day Tuesday, Chapter 5, Their First Day. The next morning found everyone gathered around the kitchen table for breakfast. Well, almost everyone. Dad, Kruger, Melody, and her brother were there. Tarzan, however, back in those early wee hours of the night/morning, had given up on finding his way to his own bed and ended up creeping into a strange room, having to curl up under some musty white dust sheets for warmth. After a fitful excuse for sleep, daylight inevitably streamed in through tall windows, encouraging him to get up, stagger back through the maze of hallways, and eventually rediscover his bedroom. Hearing cheerful voices coming from downstairs in the kitchen, however, he decided to just make his way down for breakfast too. "Good morning," Dad welcomed Tarzan as he joined the others. "Morning," muttered Tarzan, feeling far from rested, not wanting to draw too much more attention to himself. "And did you sleep well, young squire?" inquired Kruger, forking sloppy fried eggs into his mouth. "I see you're still in your jammies." Seated at the table with them, he made his observation, punctuating particular consonants, runny yolk and spittle not very well contained. Melody flinched, wiping a spot of wet egg from her forehead, while passing over the box of cereal. "Morning, Tar," she said sweetly. Tarzan gratefully accepted and poured himself a big bowl, delighted for some interaction with Mel. Still, he was a bit miffed with her brother. While everyone was busy pouring milk, eating their cereal, or shoveling eggs and toast, he whispered with annoyance to Hugo. "Where were you?" He emphasized his inquiry by kicking his pal under the table. Hugo looked at him guiltily, struggling for an excuse. "Dad, may I please be excused?" he said quickly, slamming remaining spoonfuls of cereal into his mouth. "I need to use the boys' room." Hugo never did go last night. After figuring out what he'd done to Melody and Tarzan, and watching his friend wander about all alone in the dark, he'd stopped messing about in the secret office before getting busted, and hurried back upstairs to bed without using the toilet. But not before poking his head into the kitchen first, of course, and grabbing some leftover Snickers bars he'd found just sitting out on the countertop. He'd sworn a ray of glory illuminated the alluring sugar treasure, beckoning him to come and plunder. And plunder he did. Hidden under his covers, foil candy wrappers strewn, he'd grin to himself, popping mini-bar after mini-bar into his sticky gob. Now he had a good excuse to avoid answering Tarzan's grumpy demand. He really needed to use the toilet, and badly. Hubert got up from the table and made his way upstairs to the loo. Turning on the light, he quietly locked the door behind him and then sat down to do his business in private. Probably shouldn't have had all those extra sweets last night. Extra paper was required for this job. When he was all done, he flushed and then headed over to the sink to wash his hands. After a few moments of listening to the flow of water through pipes, he realized the sound of water from the back of the toilet still hadn't stopped. Starting to feel uneasy, he looked inside the toilet and stared as the water level continued to rise, bringing with it its unsavory contents dangerously close to the top. You don't want that. Hubert fumbled frantically with the toilet handle, but the water kept getting higher. It just kept rising and rising. Water suddenly spilled everywhere, over the top of the rim, down the porcelain throne, sweeping across the tiled floor. He grabbed a scrub brush and attempted to plunge the toilet. Absolutely useless. Unsightly shredded soggy tissue clung throughout the white bristles. Quickly shoving it back into its holding pot, he then noticed the room itself, with nowhere to drain, was rapidly flooding with water, murky substance floating ominously about. He panicked, sloshing his way to the locked door, but then slipped on the slick tiles. Down he went with a splash. For a moment he lay there, soaking wet, holding his breath, eyes and curly hair just above water level. Then, to his horror, he spied a small yellow object floating directly for him. An undigested kernel of corn catching a ride on a soft brown canoe. Ah! Screaming and hollering to no avail, he thrashed about in the toilet water, attempting to stand up, wet used toilet paper with accompanying waste splattering all over walls and himself. Elsewhere in the house, no one heard a thing. Dad looked up from his finished breakfast plate, noticing Hubert returning completely disheveled. The others turned and looked too. "Stinky noodles! What on earth happened to you?" Dad asked, bewildered. "You're a mess." Discouraged, Hubert sat at the table with his head lowered. "I had an accident upstairs," he mumbled to the empty bowl in front of him. Seated next to him, Melody inadvertently wrinkled her nose. "Pewee, Huey!" Tarzan stared at him quizzically. Hugo, is that a peanut in your hairdo?" "I warned you last night to mind yourself when using that toilet," sprayed Kruger, not unlike the toilet he was referring to. "It clogs far too easily." Dad got up from the breakfast table and put his plate and his bowl in the sink. "Okay, kids, after Hubert gets himself cleaned up, I suggest you all get ready to head outside for the day. I'm going to be staying here for the morning and finish unpacking, but you all are free to go out and explore. It's not a very big island, so you shouldn't get too lost," he joked lightly. "And there's a nice beach close to the village you might like. How does that sound?" "And just you watch out for any flying witches on broomsticks," Kruger spat. "You'll see many a black cape caught on barbed wire fences." "There are no witches here, are there?" Melody tried to reassure herself, absent-mindedly pushing her half-finished juice away from her after a flying foreign object from Kruger's mouth went sploot into her glass uninvited. "Och, aye, the wash tray witches," he confirmed ominously. "You'll nae want to mess with 'em." Then the manager of the house grimly left the kitchen, heading to assess the carnage upstairs. "I'm sure he's teasing," smiled Dad. "Now clear the table, then get yourselves upstairs and make your beds. I'm betting you can't wait to get outside and see what adventures await today." The kids scrambled from the table, did as they were told, and happily rushed up to the rooms to get ready. After shouting goodbyes, Hugo, Melody, and Tarzan set off from the massive stone house and made their way down the dirt track between the trees heading for town. It was going to take a good while longer walking to the waterfront than it had last night, arriving to the house by pony and cart. The rain had long stopped during the night, but the leaves were still wet and the ground quite muddy. It was a cheerful-looking day nonetheless. The three of them slodged along, following leftover hoofprints and cartwheel tracks, chatting and bantering with each other, excited to go exploring together. Eventually, the low, mossy stone walls and tree coverage on either side of them came to an abrupt end, opening up to long, grassy fields. The travelers broke free from the shelter and observed the rolling land sloping gently downwards towards the coast in the direction where they were heading. Spread all around them were dozens and dozens of damp sheep, curious cows, and hay-eating horses. Taking in the panoramic view, Melody breathed out a long, contented sigh. "What a lovely way to start the first day of our holidays." Spying in one field, guarded by barbed wire fencing, a spectacularly large bull with massive rippling muscles standing nearby, Hugo could not help but point and blurt out, "Holy Maloki, look at the Conans on that bad boy." Tarzan cracked up with laughter, giving Hugo a playful shove. "Conans! Ha 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 ha! Nice one. They're called gonads, dummy." Just as juvenile as his friend, he proceeded to join in the vulgarity. "Excuse me, sir, would you like to, testify?" Holding out a pretend mic towards the pink pair of hanging baskets, swinging betwixt the hind legs of the monstrous bovine. Hugo snorted and laughed out loud as well. Then, pretending he was in the witness stand, replied, "Yes, I'd like to, testify. Ha 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 ha." Repeating Tar's dubiously clever wordplay, he shoved him right back, thinking this was all just too hilarious. The bull turned and looked at them curiously, chewing slowly on a mouthful of grass. "Ew, gross." Melody rolled her eyes and kept on walking, unable to comprehend why this was fun for boys. The boys, barely recovering from their childish mirth, picked themselves up from rolling on the ground together and ran to join her. As they continued along, they couldn't help but notice sheets of rubbish caught on the lengths of barbed wire, long shredded bits of black plastic flapping about. Perplexed as to why anyone would want to leave so much unsightly mess hanging about, they carried on down the road. After a while, they saw they were nearing their destination. Somewhere in a field not too far away stood a farmer faced with a rather tough decision. Now, everyone loves farmers because without them, there wouldn't be food to eat and all the pleasant farm fields and neat farm animals to look at. Farmers are very hard workers and have lots of responsibilities, like tending the land, looking after all their livestock, gathering in heavy bales of hay, and making sure all their grain bags and rubbish get put in the bin properly. In order to protect the hay bales from the rain and preserve them through the wintertime, it is deemed necessary to wrap each individual bale up tight, requiring lengths and lengths of plastic wrapping. And this one particular farmer, getting ready to feed his cows, had just finished removing all the black protective wrapping from a bale of hay, but wasn't quite sure what to do with all the rubbish occupying his arms. "Should I put these sheets of plastic in the rubbish bin? That would be the sensible, eco-friendly thing to do, of course," he thought to himself. Nah, let's just toss it into the air and see what happens." And with that, the responsible farmer lifted his arms and let go of the long stream of plastic wrap. Immediately, the wind snatched it out of his calloused hands and swept it up into the air, whisking it far down to the other end of the field. The dark wrapping darted along the breeze, flapping and curling like the black cape of a wicked witch on a broomstick, cackling with glee and freedom. Where will she land? No one knows. "Hee hee hee hee! I'll get you, my little pretty, and your little dog too. Watch out for that barbed wire fence!" Slap! The wicked witch flew straight into the unsuspecting fence. With a snaggle, tangle, and shred, she and her ghastly garb got well and truly caught on the many pointed barbs. Struggling only made it worse. She was left helpless, tattering and flappering in the breeze, Dorothy and Toto getting away scot-free. Sigh. Yet another sinister casualty snared for years to come on a farm field fence for the frowning disapproval of future passerbys and country strollers. As they finally approached the little village, Mel, Hubert, and Tar noticed a very large, older woman seated outside a cafe at one of those round tables with a colorful sun umbrella sticking up from the middle. There were other local folk lounging at tables outside and ordering food from the apron-wearing shop owner, pleasantly chatting away. The heavily obese woman spied the children approaching and called them over. "Hello there, young ones," she panted laboriously. "Come over here and keep an old woman company." Now a bit closer, they observed the stranger. She was wearing a massive brown faded tracksuit, not because she was particularly athletic, but probably more because the material was stretchy enough to enable her to slip into it with ease while dressing in the morning. In fact, her body composition appeared to be that of liquefied margarine from a huge vat poured into a gargantuan sack and then left to congeal. How she was able to move about was a mystery until they noticed her expensive mobility scooter she was sitting on and spilling over. "What are your names, dearies?" she demanded boldly, 3 whiskered chins wobbling. "Hello, ma'am," said Melody politely before proceeding to introduce herself and the boys. "Well, I'm Marjorie, but everyone around here calls me Grandma, so you may as well too." "Nice to meet you," Melody replied, not comfortable with using the suggested overly familiar title. Instinctively, the boys thought of margarine instead and tended to refer to her as Marge from that moment on. "How old are you 3, and where are you staying? You're obviously not from around here. Never seen you here before," accused Marjorie while ordering another 2 baked tatties with chili and a 2-liter bottle of iron brew from the nodding proprietor. Hugo and Tarzan were too distracted and spellbound by Marge's overwhelming appearance to speak. While Melody carried the small talk with the morbidly oversized local, they nudged each other, giggling conspicuously, as only nervous young boys do. "It was nice chatting with you," said Melody shortly, as she motioned to the 2 boys that it was time to go. With relief, Hugo and Tar blurted out a goodbye and then bolted towards the beach. "You didn't, glug, tell me where you were staying, glug," they heard her say between mouthfuls of sweetened orange drink. Leaving the village and following them, Melody called after, "You 2 were very rude." Arriving at the waterfront, Melody surveyed their rugged surroundings. Pretty colored pebbles mixed with assorted little seashells covered the beach. The sun was peering through scattered ploofy white clouds, and green-blue waves were gently crashing along the far cliffs. Noisy white gulls floated by, while Huey and Tarzan were busy stripping down to their shorts, ready to hit the water. With a peaceful heart, Melody also dressed down to her one-piece bathing suit she'd deliberately worn under her clothes. Young Tarzan finished dumping his clothes in a pile on the rough beach when he spotted his secret crush casually undressing a short distance away. Normally, at his age, he found girls icky, but at this particular moment, his 7-year-old heart stopped beating. With juvenile fascination, his gaze slowly absorbed Melody's prepubescent features, from flat feet to flappy ears. Completely mesmerized, his vision glazed into a slow-mo TV commercial, the camera deliberately zooming in. There she stood, knobbly knees adorning gangly legs poking out of her dark purple swimming costume, like 2 twigs sprouting from an aubergine. Bony hips protruded from a slightly plump belly just below her polyester 8-year-old flat chest. Long flowing hair rested on her bare shoulders, leading to 2 long, scrawny arms. "What a babe," thought Tarzan dreamily. Spellbound, he watched her step lightly into the gently lapping waters. Then her bare foot landed on the pointy end of a protruding shell, and she suddenly let out a quick yelp, completely disrupting his reverie. Chubby Hugo charged straight past his older sister with another irreverent shout, kicking up waves of salty water all over her. Eyes tightly closed, Melody choked, coughed, and spluttered as she unintentionally tried to inhale seawater. "Woohoo!" cried Hugo, arms held high, sloshing his way further out into the cold waves. Melody, unflatteringly stringy wet hair now straggling down her face, bent over, hoovering for air, resting her hands on her knees, failing to compose herself. Coming back to reality, Tarzan sighed. "That's our Melody."